Welcome to Novara Live. I'm Michael Walker. I'm joined by Rivkah Brown. Rivkah, we haven't spoken about this today, so I'm putting you on the spot. Do you have a post-Euros final hangover?
Sadly not. I'm not a huge follower of football, and I'd say I'm relatively gender neutral in that I follow neither the men's nor the women's.
There's equal opportunities, at least. I watched the penalty shootout. Very exciting. What are we talking about tonight? We have an exclusive interview with Zarah Sultana, the first interview she has done since the launch of the New Left Party. We will also discuss some fake news around a wealth tax, which was propagated concerning millionaires leaving. A clip of Gary Stevenson will be included in that, speaking to The Rest is Politics. And I talked to author Robert Wright about, you guessed it, artificial intelligence. Now, before we go on, if you haven't got a ticket yet for our next Downstream IRL, you've still got a little bit of time. That's because tomorrow night, Novara's Ash Sarkar will be speaking with historian William Dalrymple about how the East made the West. It will be an unmissable conversation taking place at the Earth Theatre, Hackney, tomorrow from 6:30 p.m. There are still a few tickets left, so click the link in the description to make sure you get yours. It'll be a really, really excellent discussion. He is co-host of the Empire podcast, which is fantastic. Also, before we go on, if you'd like to support our work another way, you can sign up at novaramedia.com/support. British Prime Minister Keir Starmer has travelled to Scotland, where he's meeting US President Donald Trump to discuss trade. The meeting isn't taking place on government turf, though. Instead, Keir Starmer and his wife Victoria were received by Trump at his luxury golf resort in the Turnberry, southwest Scotland. And Trump didn't waste any time finding opportunities to make Starmer uncomfortable.
So I know nothing about the boats, but if the boats are loaded up with bad people, and they usually are, because, other countries don't send their best. They send people that they don't want, and they're not stupid people, and they send the people that they don't want. And I've heard that you've taken a much stronger stance on immigration.
Yeah, we've done a lot of work stopping them coming. We just signed an agreement to return them, and we've returned 35,000, in fact, under the first year of this Labour government, of people who shouldn't be in this country. So we're very pleased that we're getting on with returning people who've got no right to be here.
That's great. As somebody that loves this, I love this country. My mother was born in, as you know, born in Scotland, and it's an incredible place, a beautiful place. And if that be the case, I congratulate you. That's exactly, because, Europe is a much different place than it was just 5 years ago, 10 years ago. And they've got to get their act together. If they don't, you're not going to have Europe anymore as you know it. And you can't do that. This is a magnificent part of the world, and you cannot ruin it. You cannot let people come in here illegally. And what happens is there'll be murderers, there'll be drug dealers, there'll be all sorts of things that other countries don't want.
So if you're listening to the podcast, you wouldn't have seen, I suppose, Keir Starmer's face, which I think is just the image of a man who knows he believes in nothing, right? So you had Donald Trump there actually sounding very similar to how he did in 2016 when he was running for president, saying they're not sending their bests. Then he was saying they're sending rapists. Now, what was he talking about? Murderers, I'm not sure. Serious crimes. Anyway, sort of this demonization of migrants, and also saying it's the end of Europe, kind of a great replacement-y type thing. And this is exactly the kind of thing that Keir Starmer would have said back then. This is completely unacceptable. This is far right. This is terrible. This must be fought. And now he's sort of just standing next to him with a sort of neutral expression on his face. Yes, we have sent back lots of migrants, my good friend, Donald Trump. And the Prime Minister also seemed to struggle with questions on immigration, which was sort of directly about immigration, like this one from GB News.
The President makes it look easy dealing with illegal migration. You must be envious of his record in such a short period of time.
Well, I think we've been discussing irregular, illegal migration is a huge issue in both of our countries. In the United Kingdom, it is a real cause for concern, and that's why we must bear down on it.
ChatGPT would have given a much better answer, by the way. Like, I know I sometimes seem like I'm an advocate for using AI, but that would never just say, okay, yes, that's a issue. That's a question, which we're talking about. Like that's ChatGPT 2 or something. ChatGPT 4 gives you, would recognize that is not a suitable answer to that question. Starmer was also confronted with Trump's view on London Mayor Sadiq Khan.
Will you visit London during the state visit?
I will. I'm not a fan of your mayor.
Why not?
I think he's done a terrible job, the mayor of London. But the nasty person, I think he's done. I think
he's a friend of mine, right?
No, I think he's done a terrible job.
You could clear that was clearly workshopped, right? They've been saying, so what are you going to do when he disses Sadiq Khan? Because you don't want to disagree with the guy because you've made it your whole thing that you brown-nosed Donald Trump so that he can give us a slightly better deal than everywhere else. So they'd workshop will say, oh, he's a friend of mine. So it makes you look like you're standing up for him, even though you're not disagreeing with Donald Trump. Donald Trump basically completely ignores it and just continues saying how bad Sadiq Khan is. Obviously, Keir Starmer not willing to stand up for him in any substantive way. Just say, oh, he's my friend that you're dissing. The topic of these talks, of course, is Trump's 10% blanket tariff on British exports to the United States. That's the lowest tariff of any US trading partner so far. So brown-nosing does get you somewhere, although it's got more to do with the fact that we don't actually have a trade surplus with the United States. But anyway, on early Monday, Trump suggested that the tariffs on the UK could go even lower, telling reporters this: we are going to take a look at it. We want to make the Prime Minister happy. Starmer will also be pressing Trump to reduce the US's 25% tariff on British steel and aluminium exports, preferably to zero. And there's also the issue of potential new tariffs on British pharmaceuticals, with Trump threatening to announce them as early as next month. The Scottish government is also keen to see Trump exempt exports of Scottish whiskey from tariffs. Asked about that possibility, Trump said this: well, we'll take a look at that, or we'll talk about that. I didn't know whiskey was a problem. I'm not a big whiskey drinker, but maybe I should be one. Keir Starmer will travel up to Aberdeenshire with Trump this evening, where the president will open a new course at his second Scottish golf resort. Rivkah, Keir Starmer has obviously been committed for a while now to his position on Trump is to say, look, I'm a realist. I know that this is the most powerful man in the world, and I'm going to brown-nose the guy to try and get Britain a good deal. Now, I think there's arguments for that. I think the longer this presidency is going on, though, the longer it seems like a mistake. If you look at, say, the Canadian Liberals or the Labour Party in Australia, they've stood up to Trump, and actually it's sort of got them a bit more respect from their electorates. Keir Starmer is kind of on the lookout for something to stand for, maybe standing up against Trump, which I assume is his instincts, would have been a more astute political move, as well as being, I suppose, morally preferable.
Right. I mean, ultimately, the person or the people who are going to be electing a prime minister in 2029 aren't Donald Trump and his associates. There's no executive order that Trump can give that says that Starmer's going to be the next prime minister. It's the people of the UK. And I think what those people can see, plain and clear, is that Keir Starmer has no backbone. It's cringing, and it's excellent having this kind of almost like, as you say, dramatized example of Starmer's spinelessness in real time as he insults Britain, embarrasses Starmer, lays into Starmer's own, party colleagues, the Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, and Starmer sort of like, scrambles to try and do damage control in real time. Whether or not that 5 percentage point, discount on our trade tariffs will be worth it, I think, is yet to be seen. The damage that the US is doing to the global trade system through its deals, through its sanctions on, other countries that aren't the UK, will have ripple effects on the UK. It's not only the direct deals that we do with the US that determine the price of our goods. It's the price of Canadian goods. It's the price of Chinese goods. So the general chaos that Trump is causing wantonly with his kind of throwing his weight around with tariffs and so on, will have a knock-on effect on the UK. And all Starmer is doing is effectively allowing, Trump to continue that rampage with abandon. It's what I think gets me is the fact that all of this is happening quite literally on Trump's turf, that our prime minister, all but our head of state, obviously the king is the head of state, but effectively the prime minister is the person who runs this country, should be going to Donald Trump's golf resort to meet with him and to kiss the ring on the Turnberry Golf Resort and Hotel, rather than having Trump come to our parliament to Downing Street to pay his respects and sort of set out his stall to us. I think just tells you everything that you need to know. This entire sort of conversation, this entire negotiation is happening entirely on Trump's turf and on Trump's terms.
We've got an important update. Jack Meller says, just came from Helena, No Justice MTG's own channel. Was her birthday today? Which I didn't know. Thank you, Jack Meller, for informing me of that. And happy birthday, Helena, if you're watching. Although I suppose she might have something better to do after doing her show on her birthday. But if you are watching, Helena, happy birthday. Doing a deal with the UK on tariffs isn't Trump's only reason for visiting Scotland. He arrived on Friday and spent the weekend playing golf and signing a trade deal. And while the UK government has rolled out the red carpet, not everyone was happy with Trump's visit. In Edinburgh and Aberdeen, hundreds of people turned out to protest the president's visit, carrying signs reading "Nye Trump" and "Stop Trump, Free Gaza." Others got creative with homemade banners and signs drawing attention to a relationship that Trump's been keen to forget. That's his well-documented friendship with the now-dead financier and child sex offender Jeffrey Epstein. Others have treated Trump with more deference. On Sunday, Trump greeted European Commission Chief Ursula von der Leyen to thrash out a framework for a deal on US tariffs on European goods. This was von der Leyen announcing the terms of that deal.
We have stabilized on a single 15% tariff rate for the vast majority of EU exports. This rate applies across most sectors, including cars, semiconductors, pharmaceuticals. This 15% is a clear ceiling, so no stacking, all inclusive.
So that's a 15% tariff on most goods exported to the US from the EU, which is half the 30% that Trump had threatened. But it's not a massive win, with von der Leyen having tried to get the base tariffs down to 10%. And the deal comes with other sweeteners for the United States, including a pledge from the EU to buy $750 billion worth of energy from the US, as well as investing a further $600 billion in US industries. And the terms of that deal have left plenty of EU leaders unhappy. Hungary's right-wing leader Viktor Orban called von der Leyen a featherweight negotiator and claimed that Trump ate her for breakfast. French Prime Minister François Bayrou called the deal a dark day for Europe, describing it as an alliance of free people resolving to submission. Meanwhile, Ireland's foreign minister has said the country is, quote, not exactly celebrating the deal, describing it as the least bad option. I suppose the French prime minister saying it's a bad deal to me seems like political cover, because obviously if France really objected, then probably it wouldn't have been signed. But this does seem like a situation where Trump can claim a victory, really. Not that it's going to be particularly good for the American economy. As people say, it's consumers that pay for tariffs. But essentially, his plan to threaten allies and say, I'll put crazy tariffs on you unless you agree to my demands, does seem to be working. Other people suggesting, to be fair, that Europe does want to rearm anyway, and it will have to buy some of its arms from the United States. So maybe they're agreeing to do something they would have done anyway. Aside from trade, there was one topic that came up repeatedly in Trump's talks with both Keir Starmer and Ursula von der Leyen: Gaza.
Should Israel be doing more to allow food into Gaza?
What did she say?
Should Israel be doing more to allow food into Gaza?
Well, we gave $60 million 2 weeks ago, and nobody even acknowledged it, for food. And it's terrible. You really at least want to have somebody say thank you. No other country gave anything. We gave $60 million 2 weeks ago for food for Gaza. And nobody acknowledged it. Nobody talks about it. And it makes you feel a little bad when you do that, and, you have other countries not giving anything. None of the European countries, by the way, gave. Nobody gave but us. And nobody said, gee, thank you very much. And it would be nice to have at least a thank you.
Besides the outrageous claim that Gaza should be thanking the US for $60 million in food aid after they armed Israel to the tune of billions since October the 7th, Also, there's no point in donating food that can't get there. Trump is also just talking rubbish. The EU has given 170 million euros of food aid to Gaza this year alone, and over 450 million since 2023. Last week, the UK pledged 60 million pounds in humanitarian aid, and which is on top of the 220 million budgeted in 2023 and 2024. So what he's saying is factually untrue. It is, of course, though, all completely besides the point. The famine in Gaza is not caused by a lack of donations from the US or Europe or anyone else, but rather the fact that Israel is intentionally stopping food entering the Strip, and the US and Europe are doing nothing to make them end their genocide. So the question of we spent this much on food aid, completely irrelevant. As I say, the US and Europe doing absolutely nothing to stop Israel's genocide beyond a few tepid denunciations.
Prime Minister Netanyahu said there's no starvation in Gaza. Do you agree with that assessment?
I don't know. I mean, based on television, I would say not particularly, because those children look very hungry. But we're giving a lot of money and a lot of food, and other nations are now stepping up. I know that this nation is, right?
It's
here.
a humanitarian crisis.
Right.
It's an absolute catastrophe.
Do you think
nobody wants to see that, and I think people in Britain are revolted at seeing what they're seeing on their screens. So we've got to get to that ceasefire, and thank you, Mr. President, for leading on that, and also to just get more and more aid in. And again, America's done a lot on this. A lot of countries have done a lot. We're now working with Jordan on getting direct aid drops in, but this is a desperate situation.
That's a phrase that Starmer loves. He always goes back to it. Nobody wants to see that. It means he doesn't really have to take a position, doesn't have to say who's at fault, doesn't have to say how this could be rectified. Nobody wants to see that. It's sort of, I suppose, chosen impotence, right? You're not going to get involved, but we can all admit nobody wants to see that. Rivkah, obviously, I mean, all Western governments now changing the way they speak about Gaza. Still very, very little action. I suppose supporting Jordan do food drops. We saw pictures months ago, didn't we, of how those food drops, I mean, can both be humiliating and very dangerous, right, as a way to distribute food. All the aid organizations have said they don't want food drops. What they want is for their aid to be allowed in via the roads so that they can actually distribute it in a proper way. Your thoughts of what we saw today with Starmer and Trump?
Well, firstly, to say that, what Trump is saying about having given $60 million in aid to Gaza recently, I mean, it's like someone coming and shooting up your entire family and then asking for thanks when they arrive with a box of chocolates at the funeral. Trump has given $12 billion of military aid to the Israeli army during his presidency, which is 200 times more than the 60 million figure that he's quoting just there. When you're giving huge bags of money to the persecutors of a genocide and pennies to its victims, how can you expect thanks? It's embarrassing. It's infuriating. But I think, what we are seeing now is an attempt to draw some kind of line, to create some sort of new phase or chapter in the genocide, to suggest that now it's kind of gone beyond the pale, and now is the point where governments are supposed to care about Gaza. But in actual fact, the famine in Gaza has been warned about not even for months, not even for years, since the beginning of the genocide. Within 2 days of the 7th of October, Israel had cut off food, water, and electricity to Gaza. What did Keir Starmer say at the time? That Israel had a right to defend itself. Within days, there were humanitarian agencies warning of starvation, that premature babies were dying in hospitals because supplies couldn't reach them. This is not a novel phenomenon that has come out of nowhere. This was almost the immediate result of Israel's prosecution of its genocide in Gaza. But what we're now seeing is an attempt to sort of create an event, create a news story out of what's supposed to be a novel development in the conflict. Up until now, it was self-defense, but now it's crossed a threshold. The threshold was crossed months, if not years ago. And when those thresholds were crossed, our leaders, the same that are now expressing their dismay and their disgust, saying that they don't want to see this, which I interpret as like, I literally just don't even want to look at it, were supporting Israel. And so I think the crucial thing to remember is that the situation that's been created, which I think it's convenient to describe as a humanitarian crisis, because as you say, it sort of erases any perpetrator. Humanitarian disasters, tsunamis, earthquakes, come out of nowhere. And so has this one, supposedly. No, it was manufactured by the very same people, not only politicians, but media actors, that are now saying that they can't bear the sight of the thing that they've created. Well, I say to them, you've made your bed, now lie in it.
Earlier this month, former Labour MP Zarah Sultana resigned from the party, saying this: "Today, after 14 years, I'm resigning from the Labour Party. Jeremy Corbyn and I will co-lead the founding of a new party with other independent MPs, campaigners and activists across the country. Join us, the time is now." Well, last week, as you know, Sultana and Jeremy Corbyn launched that new party, and in just 3 days, over 500,000 people signed up to support it. Even though the party still doesn't have an official name, so they've signed up to the process of forming the party. Now, Zarah Sultana has given her first interview since quitting the Labour Party, and she gave it exclusively to Novara Media with my colleague Stephen Meffin, sitting down with Zarah earlier today. Take a look.
So Zarah Sultana, co-leading the interim process of founding this new left party with Jeremy Corbyn. It's been an incredibly busy month for you, but I want to ask you about the big news first. Did you watch the Lionesses win their historic Euros victory last night? How was the vibe? What was the vibe?
Oh, so it was in a non-traditional way of watching it. I had it on my phone, on the BBC app, and I was watching it outside King's Cross station because I'd watched the entire game on the train down from Glasgow because a friend got married. And by the time we had got into King's Cross, it was penalties, and I just set up camp essentially outside a coffee shop and watched it, and it was incredible. It was so amazing. And I think we have to stop calling it women's football. I think this is football, and the men's game is men's football, because clearly we are so much better than them.
No, that's true. Certainly in terms of victory, it's much better recently. Let me ask you then about the New Left Party. It's launched, I think, last Thursday officially. Since then, last I checked, you'd had over 500,000 sign-ups on yourparty.uk. What does it mean for you to have that level of support right out of the gate? And why do you think so many people are interested in it?
I'm going to be honest with you. I did not think we would hit 500,000 sign-ups in just 3 days. That is incredible. And what that speaks to is the sheer appetite and desire for something new. Millions of people feel politically homeless. I talk to people in the street, I knock on doors, and people don't feel like they have politicians, let alone political parties, that truly represent them. And people voted for the Labour Party at the last general election, not because they felt inspired by Keir Starmer or what the Labour Party was promising, but because they weren't the Tories. And the Labour Party had a mandate for real change. That's what it kept saying that it was going to do. And in the year that it has been in power, we have seen a return to austerity. We have seen more arms sales under a Labour government than the Tories. They are worse than the Tories when it comes to arming a genocide, and they are directly complicit in that genocide, and they lie all the time to parliamentarians. They have defended selling arms to a genocidal apartheid state in court, and I could not knock on another door asking people to vote for the Labour Party when it is a genocide party, when it is an austerity party. And so I am very excited to be able to be part of building something new. It has never been done before in British politics. And so being able to take 500,000 people and more, because the numbers as we're recording this are growing, on this journey to shape something truly transformative is so important, exciting. And I recognize it as one of the most important opportunities of a lifetime. We can't get this wrong, because in 2029, as the polling currently stands, Farage will be Prime Minister. And someone like me, someone who looks like me, understands that threat acutely. And so we have to not just organise and build a new party, we have to win. And that's what this is.
Okay, I totally agree with you about the idea of not being able to get this wrong. The stakes are so high. But I guess you might have come in for a bit of criticism over the last month about there being, maybe a little bit of chaos attached to the launch of the party. Was it launched, wasn't it? The name. Do you think that matters?
No, and Westminster lobby journalists love this idea of drama. They love this idea of the left not really knowing what it's doing, but we do know what we're doing, and 500,000 people also recognise that. And the truth is they're rattled. They've never seen anything like this. And the fact that we're trying to really have democracy, not just this slogan or this, you just kind of say it and don't mean it. We're trying to have it at the heart of everything we're doing. And the idea that members choose the name, I think people can't get their heads around. And that's democracy for you. And I think we have to recognize the sheer appetite. We have to recognize that we are going to be doing rallies and roadshows. We're going to galvanize this movement that is ready for something different. But I think when we look at political parties in the UK, they represent the billionaires, they represent oil and gas, and we're saying this is a member-led party by members for members, and they're going to shape everything that we do.
So let's talk about that democratic nature of the party. So you're leading up to a founding conference in the autumn.
Yes.
What is the scope of the democracy that's going to be involved there? So you talked about deciding a name, but what else is going to be put to the members? What level of kind of fine-grainedness is
So before we get to that conference, we need to put together a conference arrangements committee. We need to make sure that we have truly every member feeling empowered to get involved. And what I think that looks like, and obviously these are discussions, what I think that looks like is one member, one vote. It looks like having an accessible way of engaging, which is both in person and hybrid, which is affordable for everyone. And we need to get those details right. That conference and that membership has to look at governance. It has to look at policy. It has to look at even tactical alliances going forward. I obviously have preferences over things and I'm happy to share them, but ultimately it will come down to our members, what the name is, how we operate when it comes to, a new popular front like what we've seen in France. We can all have ideas, and obviously Jeremy has also said, please share those ideas. We want everyone to get involved, but we need to get the best ideas and we need to then deliver on those.
And what about the leadership structure? Will that be a matter of democracy
Absolutely.
as well? So it could be a single leader, it could be co-leaders, it could be a Zarah Sultana, Jeremy Corbyn leadership race.
It's whatever the members want. And obviously, again, I have a preference that me and Jeremy should be able to co-lead this, but the members will get to choose. And that's what's really quite exciting. It is literally transferring that power. And I guess for a lot of people who have only really seen politics done through traditional party structures, that's going to be a culture change. But we're really interested in harnessing that energy and allowing people to choose what direction this takes.
All right, let's talk about electoral stuff now. So we've seen the polling. Anyone on the left who's seen the polling recently is like, oh shit, this could happen. 10 to 15% of vote share out the gate.
That is a floor, not a ceiling, as far as I'm considered.
All right, but now a lot of that vote is coming from Labour and some of it from the Greens. What about reform? What's the strategy going to be for reform, for taking them on?
Well, you can't take on reform by mimicking them, which is what the Labour Party have done with this race to the bottom on immigration, and essentially just following their lead. We have to provide a real alternative. We need to show that we will defend migrants' rights. We will address people's material concerns, because everyone is worried about the end of the month when the bills drop. They look at the profits that these water companies get, these energy companies get, well, when their bills are getting even higher. And we need to address material concerns. That's what the Labour Party should have done and hasn't done and refuses to do. And that is the only way we can beat reform, not by trying to be like them, because why would you vote for a copy when you can vote for the original, which is what I tried to tell the Labour Party when I was in it. And so we need to fight on our terms and not allow the far right to dictate those.
And fighting on your terms, would that mean, so for example, in individual seats, would you run candidates in winnable seats only, or would you risk sort of splitting the Labour vote in reform seats?
The membership will decide this, and I think we have to be strategic. We have to identify the places where we can win and where others who have the same goals and values around progressive politics, around defeating reform, where we can work together. And obviously, when there is a time for that, that will be, I imagine, a negotiation. But we will not be doing politics in the old way, where it's just a few men in a small room and kind of hashing it out. It will be led by members, and there will be, I believe, and I would actually argue for that tactical alliance method, but it will be on our terms, and it will be in the interest of our members, but also to stop Farage getting into power, because that has to be the guiding principle.
Let me ask you about your Labour journey, because I think it reflects for a lot of people who are members of the Labour Party who felt discounted as members, which is something that you're promising that this new left-wing party won't do. They were sort of asked to leave, and now you've provided a home for them. What was your journey through Labour? Because a similar sort of story for you.
Yes.
You were asked to leave, and now you have.
Yes.
So tell us your journey.
So I joined the Labour Party as a 17-year-old under Ed Miliband. I was really angry about the coalition government tripling tuition fees. I saw that as a direct attack on my generation. And we see that now, where we've had generations of young people saddled with student debt. So when I went to university, I got involved with the free education movement. I'd gone to the occupied West Bank with my dad on a Labour Friends, a Labour to Palestine delegation, Labour activists, Labour members. And I saw apartheid, and I saw what land theft and what occupation, militarised occupation looked like with my own eyes as an 18-year-old. And it shaped everything for me, my political journey. And then I got involved with Students for Justice in Palestine. I got involved with the National Union of Students. And then Jeremy Corbyn becomes leader of the Labour Party, and immigrants weren't going to be thrown under the bus, and young people weren't this kind of photo opportunity anymore, but real stakeholders in an exciting vision. And I remember the rallies in Birmingham, and I remember feeling hope for the very first time, and a lot of people did. And we know what happened, the attacks by the political and media establishment on what Jeremy's vision was and what all of our collective vision was. And I had got involved with young Labour structures in the Labour Party. Before I got elected, I actually worked as a community organiser, because Jeremy had a vision of doing politics differently in the Labour Party. And that was the very first thing that Keir Starmer actually got rid of, the community organising unit. And so I have experience through the various structures of the Labour Party as just an ordinary member, then as someone who's an organised young person sitting on a committee, and then as a community organiser, and then as a member of Parliament. And the Labour Party isn't what many of us believed it was, a progressive vehicle of socialists and social democrats, of people who actually want equality, investment in our public services, foreign policy that isn't just, warmongering. And the Labour Party that we have today has been completely captured by corporate donors, by a prime minister that is obsessed with freebies and actually not holding his government to account and holding himself to account. Actually, he thinks he's above it all, and the rules are for everyone else but not for them, because the things that you were attacking the Tories on, you're happy to do yourself. And I think people see through that hypocrisy, and they're not having it anymore. To me, the Labour Party is dead. It's dead morally, it's dead politically, and it's dead electorally as well. So what are we doing? Are we going to allow them to tell us on the left that we don't have another choice? We have to vote for them or it's Farage. We're saying, screw your, false choice. We're going to build something, and we're not just, coming for votes here and there. We are the left. We are going to take all the left, and we're going to win. And that's what the pitch is. Like you said, Keir Starmer said, well, if you don't like it, leave. So I did. And me and Jeremy and millions of other people are going to build something new and different. And they are rattled.
I really like that way as a way of ending it. Keir Starmer told us, if you don't like it, leave. And we did. That's only part of a longer interview. We'll be putting out the full version on Novara Media's YouTube channel at 9:00 this evening. I recommend watching it, not least of all because Zarah tells Stephen about the internal Labour Party moves around her suspension, why she quit when she did, as well as what she thinks the new party should be called. Rivkah, 500,000 people now have signed up to this party. I know the naysayers say that's not the same as joining a party. These aren't direct debits, like when it comes to the Labour Party or Reform or whatever. But you just can't deny that that is a lot of interest and a lot of support in 3 days. I think the Labour Party will be rattled, actually. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, these are just people who've put their email address into a website form, including me and other members of the media who want to be kept updated on the party's progress. But still, it's 500,000 people who are interested, and that's an impressive figure. And more concrete polling suggests that between 10% and 18% of British voters would consider voting for this new party. And that's before it's even put out a platform. I'm quite admiring of the quite bold and radical democratic approach that Zarah and Jeremy are taking with the new party, particularly given their own abuse at the hands of an extremely authoritarian Labour Party. We only have to look at the Ford report to see what the results of that kind of authoritarian party structure are, as well as obviously their own treatment. But I think there may be a danger that they've both been a bit too burnt by that and swung the other way to the extent where perhaps, they're reluctant to put out any clear statement of intent beyond the sort of relatively vague statement that we've seen so far for fear of seeming too sort of dictatorial. I actually think many of those 500,000 people who've signed up to hear about the new party want to be told a little bit what they're being offered. And we already know, that Corbyn's policies from his 2017 and 2019 manifesto remain extremely popular, whether that's free school tuition, increasing the top rate of tax, free broadband. These are all incredibly popular policies. I'm not saying we should simply reheat for the many, not the few. But what I am saying is that we have a huge range of policies that we already know people want that are right there in front of us. Wealth taxes, which I know we'll be discussing later, an obvious one that Zach Palansky is making a key part of his own pitch for Green Party leader. So my feeling about all of this is, why not offer people something and then iterate? You can have party democracy. You can have an internally, flat structure or a less hierarchical structure, whilst also beginning with an offer that can change between now and 2029. That sounds like quite a long time, but in reality, it's only about 3 years, maybe 2 years before people start to sort of campaign and, announce their candidacies or their party's campaigns. So really, that's not a huge amount of time to have conferences, decide on a platform. I really think that there needs to be kind of an expedited process of putting together a platform. And honestly, that Zarah Sultana and Jeremy Corbyn, from their combined half a century in Parliament, should have something to offer to people to begin with.
Yeah, I think I disagree, actually. I think there's no rush. As long as this is created before the next general election, it's still going to really scare the Labour Party and could potentially win. If you think about it, reform was created, or at least sort of Nigel Farage's reform campaign sort of emerged during the election campaign, and they had, a very big impact. I suppose I have doubts about the extent to which you can have a genuinely bottom-up process. I think this party is going to need some leadership, which will then get approved by a membership, as opposed to sort of hoping that you can have everyone put a different name in a hat and then sort of. I think there are some unrealistic ways of looking at party democracy, but I'm not at all worried about it taking a while. I think there's plenty of time, and also I do think the biggest advantage this party has compared to alternate ways it could have gone is that all the arguments that could have been thrown at them from the left or from the centre left just don't work. Because the strongest argument would have been, you're going to help put Nigel Farage in Downing Street. Well, Nigel Farage is already way ahead of Labour in the polls, so that doesn't really work. You're splitting. Why don't you just sort of strengthen the Labour Party against Nigel Farage? Well, Keir Starmer literally said, as Zara said there, F off, I don't want you in the party, so that doesn't work, right? And then they say, oh, well, at least there's some chance Keir Starmer will keep out Farage. You're going to let him in. This is an emergency. The idea that Nigel Farage getting into Downing Street is an emergency is difficult coming from Keir Starmer, who's basically accepted most of his arguments. So I think the development of a new party, if I'm honest, I would have preferred Labour under Keir Starmer to have been a broad church, social democratic party that could take on Nigel Farage and could sort of build an alliance between, urban young people, ethnic minorities, and some of those red wall voters. Because I do think this new party will struggle to get those red wall voters. I would have preferred to have had a big tent, broad social democratic Labour Party. But that doesn't exist. So I don't want to mention Paul Mason, but, there are people that argue, and actually very few people are arguing this because the arguments don't work, but there would have been many people arguing that why don't we just have a broad Judge Labour Party? But Keir Starmer killed that. And so I do think that forming this party was the only option. And I think it's good, because otherwise the only person setting the agenda in British politics was Nigel Farage. I'm sure you've heard this argument before. It would be great to tax the rich more, but then they'd all just leave. It's a standard argument as to why it's actually a good thing that the 50 richest families in the UK have more wealth than the bottom 50% of families. Yes, that really does mean 50 families have more wealth than 34 million people combined. Anyway, in the service of this argument that we should let the wealthy have more yachts, a story was widely disseminated in the media late last month. So this is from The Standard. Britain on track to lose unprecedented 16,500 millionaires in 2025 amid high taxes and non-dom crackdown. So the argument that even these sort of tepid Labour policies of cracking down on non-doms and moderately raising taxes, which they barely did anyway, that's leading to this exodus of millionaires. Also in The Independent, millionaires to flee UK in record numbers. That 16,500 figure there again. And then in The Telegraph, Britain to lose more millionaires than any other country after tax raid. And I suppose to make this seem more credible, they've converted this into a chart. So you can see the United Kingdom losing 16,500 millionaires and the UAE gaining 9,800. As I say, this exodus was apparently in response to Labour's fairly tepid policies on tax. And the implication presumably would be that should absolutely rule out any more radical proposals for a wealth tax, the kind of tax that Labour haven't even suggested yet. Well, that argument might work, except these figures were not far from completely made up. This was the Financial Times on the weekend. So they say doubt cast on widely quoted millionaire migration numbers. Report published in association with Henley and Partners criticised for use of LinkedIn data and definition of private wealth. Now, the article, or the FT article, I should say, draws on analysis by the Tax Policy Associates think tank, which said the claim was made based on analysis of LinkedIn profiles and was therefore not representative. And notably, the company that did the original analysis, so that led to all of these headlines, barely even stands by the claims itself. So it's called New World Wealth. And this is from the FT article. Andrew Amoyles, the founder and sole employee of South Africa-based NWW, so only got one employee, told the Financial Times there was just a lack of information around, and we've tried to fill the gap as best we could on the migration of rich individuals. Then he says, the fact that it's been so heavily linked to non-doms is a little unfortunate because, to be honest, we don't know whether someone is a non-dom or not, he added. So basically our data's not very good. I'm just one guy anyway, working from my home office in South Africa. As I say, the New World Wealth outfit, that's just one person. But this evidence, or this report, was done in partnership with another organisation. Perhaps they're more credible and more reliable. Well, the FT goes on to say, Amoyles' wealth migration reports are published in association with Henley and Partners, a London-based consultancy that markets schemes selling passports and residency permits in more than 40 countries. So they service the super rich. The report has come under fire from Dan Needle, founder of the Tax Policy Associates think tank, who said that until an independent audit is carried out, the wealth migration report should be treated as marketing material, not evidence. Well, the habit of companies who represent the wealthy putting out questionable data when it comes to wealth taxes was highlighted by Gary Stevenson this week, speaking on the Rest is Politics podcast.
How do you feel when you see this debate that's going on at the moment, which Farage is currently trying to tap into, that the non-doms are all leaving, the super wealthy are all leaving Britain because they're being taxed too much?
I know who funds these analyses. I know it's private wealth funds. Listen, I've been doing this work, so I'm relatively high profile the last 2 years. I've been doing this work in public for 5 years. And for years and years and years, I would go on LBC and talk radio, and I would say we need to tax the rich for free. And I would go up against somebody who works for the IEA and is paid by a billionaire. This is the truth. Listen, you know it as well as I know.
That's the Institute of Economic
There's
Affairs. 2
ways to make money in media. You sell news to the public, or you sell the public to the rich. There's 2 ways to make money in politics. You convince the public, you sell the public to the rich. I know, listen, when I first left trading, the first thing I wanted to do was go to work for a think tank. This is the obvious thing to do. And I went to look for a left-wing think tank because you think these guys are going to be doing work on inequality. I volunteered at a left-wing think tank in London. There was nobody working on inequality. You know why? Because they couldn't get funding for it. So the problem you have here is that the rich are aggressively going to try to prevent any increase on their taxation. When I was writing the book, I was reading Hard Times, Charles Dickens. There's a section in there where they talk about how the rich were saying if the government raises any taxes on them, they're going to take their factories and throw them into the sea. This is 150 years ago.
Amazing anecdote about the Charles Dickens book saying they're going to throw their factories into the sea. Obviously, they said the same thing about the weekend, right? Whenever you propose some kind of policy that's going to harm the rich, they will put a lot of money into think tanks saying it's a terrible idea. Now, that doesn't mean you should say any questions about a wealth tax should be dismissed out of hand as pure propaganda. I'm sure there are lots of sort of technical discussions that need to be had, but we shouldn't buy these arguments wholesale. And unfortunately, someone who doesn't seem to be as critical as Gary when it comes to those proposing or suggesting wealth tax are impossible. Someone who is, I suppose, buying into those arguments is the business secretary, Jonathan Reynolds, who said this to GB News on Friday.
But the idea there's a magic wealth tax, some sort of levy, that doesn't exist anywhere in the world. Switzerland has a levy, but they don't have capital gains or inheritance tax. There's no kind of magic. We're not going to do anything daft like that. And I say to people, be serious about this. The idea you can just levy everyone. What if your wealth chopper was not in your bank account? What was in fine wine or art? How am I going to... How would we tax that? This is why this doesn't exist. And there's a lot of populism out about this. I'm frustrated. To me, I see colleagues sometimes say this in Parliament. I say, come on, get serious.
This is why this doesn't exist. There might be another reason why it doesn't exist, which is that powerful people don't want it to exist. It's not the case that every policy that we don't have because it would be impossible. There's also something called interests in politics. Again, I'm not saying there might not be technical, practical difficulties with a wealth tax. That means we need to think very carefully about it and do it correctly. But to just say, oh, this is daft populism, if it worked, we'd have done it already, I think is not a sensible way for a Labour politician to be doing politics. And someone who disagrees with Jonathan Reynolds is Martin Sandbu. He's the European economics commentator for the Financial Times. He had an article out today or yesterday saying trade and wealth tax myth busting. Know your facts before conventional wisdom gets you. Now, in the article, he lists what he calls 4 myths about wealth taxes. I'm just going to show you the first one. So he says the myth, it's too hard to do, which is basically what Jonathan Reynolds was saying. Practically, it's too difficult. And so Martin Sandbu says, the idea that implementing a net wealth tax is particularly challenging in terms of logistics and governance keeps coming up. Of course, it could be that the UK tax administration is particularly useless. The FT reports that MPs have accused the government of not knowing how much tax billionaires pay. It could also be that the complainers have not bothered to look at how net wealth taxes are implemented in the countries that have them. Switzerland and Norway have 2 of the world's richest, most successful and best governed economies. They both levy net wealth taxes and have been doing so for a very long time. While such a tax may sometimes be politically contested, there is no sign at all that levying it is difficult in purely practical terms. In Norway, for example, property values are automatically assessed based on formulas. Financial companies report bank and investment holdings to the tax authorities, and unlisted companies' stakes are taxed based on their reported accounting values. So in other words, it's a political problem, not a technical one, the opposite of what Jonathan Reynolds was suggesting. Now, you can read the article for the other 3 reasons. As I said, he did 4 myths. I'm also going to try get him on the show, I think. It'd be good to have a Financial Times commentator saying why Jonathan Reynolds is wrong about the wealth tax. For now, though, Rivkah, that demand for a wealth tax is getting louder. The pushback against it will also get louder. What do you think of the nature of the debate so far?
Well, profoundly fact-free, I suppose. I think, as Martin Sandbu says in his article, the facts haven't yet got the people that they have that they're supposed to have got. Why is Norway not being discussed, for starters? You know, the fact that Jonathan Reynolds can right out lie and claim that there's nowhere in the world that has such taxes, when in fact 2 years ago Norway introduced them, is absurd to me. You know, GB News is Ofcom regulated. I hope people complained about that glaring factual inaccuracy. I think what's more, as a result of this, the examples of Sweden and Norway, we actually have real data about whether this supposed exodus materializes. You know, after Norway introduced its 1% levy on wealth, there was there was no so-called exodus. Of the 236,000 millionaires and billionaires who live in Norway, do you know how many left? 30. And how many of them do you think continue to send their children to private schools in Norway and intend to come back within 5 or 10 years to live or to retire in Norway? You know, the idea that there's going to be some great exodus to the UAE is absolutely absurd. If there is, people might enjoy a couple of years of living on yachts and, you know, seeing the police drive around in supercars or whatever they do, and, you know, like gallivanting around air-conditioned malls. But no one's going to want to live in the UAE forever. Like, that sounds like torture, quite frankly. And so I think, you know, we overlook the fact that millionaires and billionaires have been proven not to, you know, flee en masse when wealth taxes are introduced, because they have real ties to the country that they live in, much like we give asylum seekers the right to live here because they have real ties to the country that they live in. People aren't just going to leave, particularly for low tax nations, which tend to be, you know, apart from being low tax nations, pretty uninhabitable and awful, which is probably why they need to incentivize people to move there using low tax regimes. And I think, you know, it seems ironic to me always with these kinds of discussions that millionaires and billionaires, business owners often, will complain to, you know, till the cows come home about workers threatening to strike over conditions that they don't like, are the ones who continually hold us over a barrel when we threaten to tax them, just as other developed, you know, nations in Europe are doing. It's just absurd to me that they're allowed to make these threats, but workers, when they're put in conditions that they don't like, are totally unreasonable. And I think, you know, just that kind of hypocrisy indicates the kind of desperation that these people, you know, are feeling because they're threatened by, well, to be frank, quite an unlikely prospect from the sounds of it that Labour will introduce a wealth tax. But yeah, I think that this is where, when we're talking about the Green Party and this new party, wealth taxes should come in. They're rattled because they know that people really want them, not just, you know, people on the left, but conservative voters, you know, centrist Labour voters, the public at large broadly supports taxes on wealth. And so that's why we see this kind of hysterical pushback against them using entirely unevidenced claims.
It's not often I get to interview people whose books I read as a teenager. But Robert Wright is one of them. In the 1990s, he wrote a very successful book on evolutionary psychology called The Moral Animal. And since then, he set his sights on how the concept of God evolved across cultures and why Buddhism is true. He's a man of eclectic interests. On his Non-Zero podcast, lots of episodes are devoted to decrying American support for Israel and explaining why a Cold War with China probably isn't a good idea. His main focus now, though, is on something I'm obsessed with, which is artificial intelligence. He's currently writing a book about it. And I started by asking him why he's come to be obsessed with AI.
Well, I had been mildly conversant in it over the years. In fact, longer ago than I care to remember, like the early 1980s. I actually interviewed Geoffrey Hinton, who got the Nobel Prize and the Turing Award and is sometimes called the godfather of modern AI. But until the large language model revolution, I didn't really appreciate the potential power of the technology. Even though, you know, I had asked him in the 80s, like, you know, what's your approach and everything? And his approach is the one that prevailed. You know, these large language models are built on neural networks with so-called massive parallelism. That's what he was advocating at the time. But I really didn't get the picture back then about how potentially powerful this could be. And now I'm convinced that this is going to be a complete earthquake in terms of overall social impact, and that we're not thinking nearly as carefully about it as we need to be thinking.
And when you say overall social impact, do you mean sort of jobs or something else?
Yeah, I mean, you know, I don't rule out the hardcore doomer scenarios. Like, I'm agnostic on the idea that AI could actually take over, but the more I've looked into it, the harder I find it to completely eliminate that possibility. But even leaving that aside, when you look at the impact on things like jobs, on just our way of life, people using AIs as companions, the capacity of AI to persuade people of things, and therefore the ability of so-called bad actors to use it to, to get bad effects, using it to make bioweapons and so on. I think if you look at the overall impact and how fast this is going to happen, you may come to agree with me that we're looking at it exactly the wrong way. And the way we're looking at it is as this big race there where we have to beat China. And I think full speed ahead is like a really bad motto for this technology.
Yeah, well, I want to get onto P Doom and the race. I've got some clips of Dario Amodei, Sam Altman. I know people you speak a lot about on your brilliant podcast. A question I wanted to ask you, though, as someone who, I discovered via your writing about evolution, is do you think that AI is evolving? And I suppose what I mean by this, and this seems sort of significant to me when it comes to the control question. So most technologies are designed, right? So someone's written the algorithm and you know exactly how they work. To me, it seems like a lot of these AI programs are more analogous to evolution because, especially when it comes to reinforcement learning, you're not telling it how to solve a maths problem. You're not telling it how to do coding. You're saying, if you get the maths problem right, that's a reward. If you get the coding problem right, that's a reward. If you get it wrong, you get a punishment. And that to me seems like a recipe for I suppose, the development of emergent properties we might not understand. You obviously have studied evolution a lot more than I have. You're writing a book about AI, I'm not. What can you tell me about whether or not you think AI is analogous to evolution?
Yeah, my book does emphasize evolution a lot as a way to look at the way technologies develop generally, but certainly including AI. And among the implications of that is, we're not going to really be in control of this process. I mean, we never are with technologies, right? But as you suggested, this technology is kind of particularly opaque. It is by a kind of a process of evolution that these large language models take shape. We don't reach in and connect the neurons up, and we don't understand exactly how they're hooked up. We just know that these things behave increasingly as if they were at least as smart as us. And so, yeah, I think, technology can be viewed as a kind of a straightforward continuation of biological evolution because the way it takes shape has so much in common with the way biological organisms take shape. But in any event, I absolutely agree that there are emergent properties. There have been emergent properties. We've seen things that weren't really intentionally designed in, but turn out to be properties of these machines. And some of them aren't great properties, like deception, for example. So I just think there's plenty of reason to be careful about this. And I think ultimately, all the nations of the world are going to have to address this problem together. And right now we're looking at this in the opposite way, right? It's like it's nation versus nation. If we win, everything will be great. I don't think so.
Do you think AI could be conscious? I mean, this is a question of definitions, but it's a big argument with, I suppose, political and obviously moral implications. If AI programs are developing emergent properties in the same way that biological evolution created this emergent property of consciousness, could the evolution of AI agents create a property of conscious, I suppose, silicon agents?
I mean, they could be conscious now, strictly speaking, because the distinctive characteristic of consciousness, or one of them, is that you can never be sure whether anything other than you has it, right? I mean, I've always assumed that, like, my dogs have some sentience. It's like something to be them, but I never know for sure. And strictly speaking, I don't even know that it's like something to be my wife, although I'm willing to take her word for it. And I'm willing to assume that, all other humans are conscious. But there's never any way of really verifying that for sure. And that's why consciousness as a subject matter is just different from everything else that science tries to study. It's just not publicly observable. So I don't rule out the possibility that AI is conscious or could become conscious. The question is consciousness, what they call a substrate independent property? In other words, do certain kinds of information processing give rise to it, regardless of whether the substrate is, the organic chemistry that constitutes us or silicon? And it seems to me plausible that, the metaphysics of consciousness could be such that it's just a property of certain kinds of information processing, and it doesn't matter what the material is. In which case, you would imagine that AI, if it's not conscious now, will eventually become that.
Let's talk about PDoom. That's the word that people in Silicon Valley, I suppose, use. It means probability of doom, so probability of extinction from AI. I want to sort of get into this by showing clips of Geoff Hinton, who you mentioned before. He developed the technology. You interviewed him, you said a few decades ago, I think. Sam Altman, everyone knows who Sam Altman is. And then Ben Mann, who is co-founder of Anthropic.
There's still a chance that we can figure out how to develop AI that won't want to take over from us. And because there's a chance, we should put enormous resources into trying to figure that out. Because if we don't, it's going to take over.
I think AI will probably, most likely, sort of lead to the end of the world, but in the meantime, there will be great companies created with serious machine learning.
How much time do we have, Ben? So I think 50th percentile chance of hitting some kind of superintelligence in just a small handful of years is probably reasonable. My best granularity of forecast for could we have an X risk or extremely bad outcome from AI is somewhere between 0 and 10%.
So somewhere between 0 and 10%. Well, you're giggling, as the technology that your company is developing, you're suggesting could kill all of us. The statement from Sam Altman there, it might kill us all, but it will create some good companies in the meantime and some profit for me. Bob, I suppose there's two ways of interpreting. Let's put Geoff Hinton to one side, I suppose, for a moment, but Sam Altman and the Anthropic co-founder. Are they being incredibly irresponsible because they think that the technology they're developing could end the world and they're doing it anyway? Or are they bullshitting us? So lots of people suggest that sort of by, in their words, exaggerating the existential threat, they are distracting from the current harms the technology is doing, and also potentially overemphasizing the potential and capacity and the power of the technologies they control. Because obviously, if you say this could end the world, then if you're an investor, you think, well, this is presumably pretty powerful. Maybe I should put some money into that. What's your take on that whole debate?
Well, I certainly think Geoff Hinton is being sincere. As for Altman, most of his more extreme pronouncements about doom were some time ago. He's gotten increasingly upbeat as he's come to realize that it looks kind of ridiculous if he's racing to accelerate our demise. And it's hard to say how sincere he was in the first place, because remember, when he first started talking about this, that was about the time he was trying to get Elon Musk involved in investing in or contributing to OpenAI, and Elon was something of a doomer. So it's what you would say if you wanted to get Elon Musk involved in the collaboration you got him involved in. That said, I what he's saying about doom being certainly one possible outcome. A lot of people in his milieu believe that. He, I think, read the book Superintelligence by Nick Bostrom, which a lot of them read and which got a lot of them worried. So, Altman, I tend to be agnostic on his degree of sincerity at any given moment. But there are a lot of smart and serious people who know the technology better than I do, who are very worried about actual extinction.
That was Robert Wright speaking to me earlier today. We'll be putting out the full video of that conversation tomorrow. We got into some really, really interesting topics, whether AI might replace humans, the strange ideology that thinks that's a good idea. And we talked a lot about relations between the United States and China. That's it for the show for now. I'm going to be away until next week. I'm going camping in Yorkshire with my dad and my sister, which might be a little bit wet. Hopefully it will be enjoyable. You'll be in very safe hands until then, though. So come back tomorrow at 6 p.m. For another edition of Novara Live. For now, you've been watching Novara Media. Good night.